So, Unit 3 discusses all the components and things that occurred in order to create what's known as our Constitution. Just as a reminder, remember that the United States Constitution, guys, is actually the second Constitution that our government functioned under, with the first, of course, being the Articles of Confederation. Well, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at what exactly the Constitution is, what it is comprised of, and basically what this sets up for you as an American citizen. So let's go ahead and take a look at this together. Now understand, guys, that our Constitution is in fact made or based upon 7 major principles, which essentially establish what the Constitution does for us as a people. Now, the very first that we'll talk about is in fact popular sovereignty, which is the idea that government is actually under the authority of the people. So basically, by that logic, the people are the ones who give our government power. They work for us, not the other way around. The second major principle is what's known as republicanism. Basically, under republicanism, voters hold the ruling power. We elect representatives and then give them the responsibility to make laws and conduct government in our name. So when we vote for our representatives and our senators, we always want to make sure that we're voting for someone who actually represents what we personally believe in, or at least comes as close as we can to what we personally believe in, because we're going to give them that power to make those decisions for us at the federal level. Our third one we're going to talk about is limited government. Now, basically, under this idea of limited government, what we see is that basically the government only has the powers that we give to it. So if we actually look at our Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution basically creates Congress and lines out what powers they have. Article 2 explains the job of the executive branch, meaning the president, and what powers she has. And the last one, Article 3, establishes the judicial branch, which includes, of course, our Supreme Court. Now, understand that under this concept of limited government, the government and all the officials who function for it are not basically free of the law, all right? Every law that they create also applies to them. A fourth one that we discuss as a major principle is the idea of federalism. Now, what this means, guys, is that when we, the people, give power to our federal government, that power is then shared between not only our states, but also the federal government. Now, with that being said, there are 3 specific types of power that exist for our government. Enumerated powers or numbered powers are the powers that we give only to the federal government. Now, this means coining money, regulating trade between states, as well as foreign trade, maintaining our armed forces, and the creation of our federal court system. Reserve powers are those powers given to the states. Now, these things include the creation of our school systems, marriage and divorce laws, as well as trade that happens inside of the state's borders. The last type of power is known as concurrent powers. Now, these are powers shared by state and federal governments. That's why they are concurrent, okay? Now, what that means is that both our state and federal government have the power to raise taxes. You see that here, for example, when we pay federal income tax and a state income tax in Colorado, as well as all the small taxes that you see, for example, that help to build our communities, to help build our shopping centers, etc. Both state and federal governments have the power to borrow money. Both state and federal governments provide for our public wellness. So this is things like our Social Security system, welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, etc., as well as the ability to administer criminal justice. So part of our federal court system is also the creation of our lower courts, which are our state courts, county courts, and city courts. Moving on to the fifth of the principles. Our fifth major principle is known as the separation of powers. And that basically means that no one branch of government maintains all the power in that government, all right? Separation of powers gives specific jobs to each branch of our federal government, which then takes us to the next principle, a system of checks and balances. each branch actually has the ability to keep the others in check or limit what they do. So if our president were to make a decision and Congress by law sees that being an overstep of power, Congress and the Supreme Court do have the power to step in to say no. Much the same way as if Congress tries to make a law that is questionable under the Constitution, the Supreme Court can step in and say no. Now, at the same time, this is a perfect example of, let's say, if a president says they want to declare war. He actually or she actually could never do that because that's a power that lies under Congress, not the president's abilities. Our last major principle is something known as individual rights. Now, these individual rights are actually listed in the Constitution under what's known as the Bill of Rights. These are the 10 amendments that were added in 1791 that basically protects all of our basic liberties and rights as a citizen. So the Constitution, guys, why is this called a living document? What you have to understand, long story short, is that our Constitution is intended to be amended or changed as our society needs it, with good reason, all right? Under the original Constitution, keep in mind, things like slavery and an inability for women and minorities to vote existed. Well, over time, as our populations shift, as our understanding of what basic rights and civil liberties are, this allows for the Constitution to be changed or amended to suit the needs of our people. Because again, remember that when it comes to our country, the power of our government comes from us as citizens. So let's go ahead and discuss now our three major branches of government, okay? Now, we actually have three branches. They're legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. Now, our legislative branch is comprised of essentially our House of Congress. Now, in Congress, we actually have what's known as a bicameral situation, meaning that there are actually two houses that exist in Congress, our House of Representatives and our senators. Now, the legislative branch's job is, in fact, to make the laws, to approve presidential appointments, like what is currently happening right now with the choice of the president to pick a new Supreme Court justice, as well as to ensure that they are representing our needs. Now, the way this works, in our Senate, we actually have two senators from each state to represent us at that level. And then below that, in the House of Representatives, the number of congressmen is actually based upon our population. Now, representatives must be at least 25 years old and serve 2-year terms. And they have to be then, of course, elected or re-elected every 2 years. Senators must be at least 30 and serve in 6-year terms. What's interesting with Senate is that only 1/3 of the 100 senators is ever up for election in a 2-year cycle. So let's say in 2020, all right, approximately 33 or 34 senators will be up for re-election this year. Then 2 years from now, another 33 to 34, and so on. This keeps stability in the Senate so that as laws are being created, there are always people sitting in Senate who knows what work has already been completed. Now, this branch is created under Article 1 of our Constitution. Our next branch is the executive branch, and it includes the president, the vice president, and his cabinet, which is basically a series of individuals who work under the president in special offices and departments. Now, this branch is created under Article 2 and basically states that the president's job is to carry out the nation's laws, as well as it gives him the roles of commander-in-chief of our military. He is considered to be our chief diplomat. She is considered to be our head of state, representing all Americans, and is technically the legislative leader, meaning that if Congress proposes new laws, they come to him to sign off on, and at the same time, he can propose new laws for Congress to consider. Now, he or she is supposed to report on basically the state of our nation under what's known as the State of the Union Address. Now, understand while he can sign laws into effect, she can also veto laws proposed by Congress. The president is able to pardon people of crimes is given the task of appointing federal judges. And as you know, 2020 being the election year, the president does in fact get elected every 4 years. Now, the third branch created under Article 3 is in fact our judicial branch. Now, this includes our Supreme Court and the lower courts. Now, lower courts, of course, include things like district and appeals courts, whose job is to rehear trials when people do not feel like they've had a fair trial. Our Supreme Court is actually considered a co-equal to the president and Congress, which thus gives them the ability to put checks and balances in place on the other two branches. Now, their main duty is to hear and rule on cases in which constitutional law is either being questioned or changed, or in some cases, needs to be interpreted. Ultimately, the Supreme Court does have the power to strike down decisions from Congress in a process known as judicial review if what Congress is doing could be considered questionable under our Constitution. Now, just to give you guys a nifty visual, this right here, guys, is how the Constitution provides a separation of powers. You can actually see all the different pieces that fall beneath each of the branches. This would be a great time maybe to pause this video and work on one of your note sets. Now, finally, what does this all mean to you? You see, as an American citizen or a resident of our country, there are definitely certain rights versus duties and responsibilities that you are, in fact, responsible for. Now, your rights are, in fact, outlined under the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. Now, this includes your right to life, liberty, and property, your right to freedoms of religion, speech, press, your freedom and right to assemble and petition for changes in law, your right to a trial by jury, your right to bear arms. You also have protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, as well as certain rights in the event that you are, in fact, arrested. Now, at the same time, understand that with that comes a specific amount of responsibilities and duties. All right, responsibilities are things such as voting. Paying taxes is actually considered a duty. Obeying the law is a duty. Serving on a jury is a required duty, as is selective service, or what happens in this country, the draft. Now, these things are technically, other than voting, not optional. All right, as a citizen, the paying taxes, the obeying of laws, the serving on a jury, and selective service for males are actually required by law and are punishable by law if you choose not to follow through on these. All right, so the next thing you're going to do, you're now going to go ahead and use these notes to complete the note catchers that I provided for you guys in this slide deck. Once you are finished with this, there is a Constitution scavenger hunt that you're expected to participate in. Now, in that scavenger hunt, guys, you're going to go ahead and use what's known as the Control F function. Notice that when I hit Control plus F, it pulls up a search bar. Now, the idea is that you're going to be looking for your answers embedded in a much larger note deck. And when you enter information into this search bar, you'll be able to find the information you need within the slide deck. All right. What's nice is that you're able to go ahead and search through, et cetera, et cetera. I will show you how this works actually in the major slide deck. So let's say we're looking for the term executive. You're like, I need to know information on this. You actually can go ahead into your drop down. And if you look on the left side in the slide deck, you'll see highlights for where the term does in fact show up. Okay, so here's one. And the second one shows up right here. Make sure that you're using this function to help you get through the scavenger hunt quiz. Make sure you understand the information provided, because really at the end of the day, knowing your Constitution is more than just a lesson. It's actually part of your ability to live in America as a well-rounded and knowledgeable citizen.